You're not taking it, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, good. Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly adding cross streams with other channels, adding and even revamping, did earlier this week, new and old shows. Also, this is a pre-recorded show. This is not live, so we will not, sadly, be interacting with the chat like we do so much. Not saying we won't rewatch the show and interact with you guys in the chat. This is not live. That said, MT, are you with me?
I am with you. I am here.
You know what time it is.
Is it New York merch time?
Oh. It is New York merch time.
Booty Barn, New York merch time. Is what it sounds like.
This is time for your sexy New York voice as you pitch TIR merch.
My just woke up sexy New York voice. We got your snapbacks over here. They are snapping back.
That's about as sexy in New York as it gets.
I had a friend from Brooklyn who says, "Here comes the truck driver," when she's about to speak. So here comes the truck driver. We got hoodies. We got pullovers. You name it. We got Anglo pessimism that matches your Timbs.
Pessimism.
Holla. Oh my gosh. You're gonna get so many phone numbers in that shirt.
You know what's
we
funny?
got
I'm sure Doug Lain had no idea that we were going to be this silly beforehand. He got all serious for today. And then we hit him with the silly. Thank you to all the patrons, YouTube and Twitch subscribers. You guys are the oh so important cogs in the TR machine. If you'd like to be a part of what we do here, have access to the call-in segment, the other thing that we've revamped, and have access to all the prior, of course, present champagne rooms. There's only one way. Become a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. It can all be yours.
That's what she said.
That was the wrong drop, but it kind of worked.
okay.
Well, let's bring in a very serious man. I was making AI art all night, and I was making AI art of Pascal. And I wish I would have saved some and put it up on the screen because there were some pretty awesome AI Pascal pictures. Please welcome the man of the Mau Mau Hour, the Pascal Robert. Oops.
Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles, because there is no chat.
I gotta get out. I'm in the Champagne Room sound bank, which is the inappropriate language sound bank.
Don't do it.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm back. I always get, and also
And
the right hand woman who keeps the show going with insight and level-headedness, the headless, faceless voice of reason, M. Toussaint.
hello, everyone. I didn't have an intro the other day, and we had some new viewers who were very confused. So I will insist each time now on an intro.
Is that when someone said the show got sexist?
People do consider it sexist that my face is not on the screen. And they're also like, who's that woman's voice? Who's that woman?
They don't know you're just an AI that we created.
It's true.
I
I was created to keep Jason company.
I gotta watch my sips as you're talking. Recently, in the midterm elections here in the United States, political pundits from a bipartisan perspective told the American people that this election was of dire importance. The fate of the nation was at stake. Democratic operatives informed us that a neo-fascist takeover was coming. Just look at what they're doing to women in marginalized communities. The right wing feared their voting base with communist groomers and a continued destruction of the traditional nuclear family. This isn't a new phenomenon, and we tend to hear the same rhetoric every election cycle. A cycle filled with warring talking heads on the TV or the internet podcast sphere, offering up different strategies within the system to make said system more just for all. But what is offered tends to do nothing more than further the decline in a sense of anomie or normalness, a state of confusion and chaos in which people do not know how to act. The failure of institutions seems to be seen from a bipartisan lens as well, but the conversations, if any, attempt to fix these institutions always seem to result in working within them. News punditry becomes a spectacle more akin to pro wrestling than informing the demos. From the book Society of the Spectacle, the society that bears the spectacle does not dominate underdeveloped regions solely by its economic hegemony. It also dominates them as the society of the spectacle. Even where the material base is still absent, modern society has already used the spectacle to invade the social surface of every continent. It sets the stage for the formation of indigenous ruling classes and frames the agendas. Just as it presents pseudo goods to be coveted, it offers false models of revolution to local revolutionaries. The bureaucratic regimes in power in certain industrialized countries have their own particular type of spectacle, but it is an integral part of the total spectacle, serving as its pseudo opposition and actual support. Even if local manifestations of the spectacle include certain totalitarian specialization of social communication and control, from the standpoint of the overall function of the system, those specializations are simply playing their allotted role within a global division of spectacular tasks. One man that's been studying this book quite a bit and has been an influence on even my work on the idea of the spectacle is Doug Lain. Please welcome the managing editor of Sublation. Is that what we call Doug? The CEO of Sublation. The man. He's shaking his head. Please welcome Doug Lain.
Hello. The crowd goes wild.
Mm-hmm.
What do we call you, Doug? Are you the, what I say, head? Just CEO?
People don't call me the CEO. I call myself that all the time, but no one refers to me that way. I don't know. Technically, I am the CEO of a company called Sublation Media, but my role is like head YouTuber, editor, publishing manager.
I like CEO way better than head YouTuber.
Yeah, I mean, like I just do like if something needs to be done, it generally falls to me ultimately to get it done. There are some things that I can't do, but most of the things that have to happen, I oversee.
I like
We're bringing in
SEO.
SEO. What's the S stand for in SEO?
You're the search engine optimization.
Oh, right. Right.
Sublation Media.
I am not the SEO. Although I am the SEO guru, I suppose. But the one that doesn't remember what SEO stands for. So,
But Doug, we didn't get you on here to talk about your fancy title.
well, okay.
Pascal, I know you said you have some questions for Doug Lain.
Absolutely, I do have some questions for Doug Lain. I watched some of your video montages on Society of the Spectacle. I also talked to there's the one you were talking about, that film that was on Netflix. What was that film, that lefty film that was on Netflix that you were talking about?
Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up. Right. And you were mentioning that. My main question is spectacle a tool of the capitalist ruling class, or is it actually an objective of the ruling class in and of itself to create spectacle? Is it simply a tool, or is it actually part of the fundamental goal of the capitalist ruling class?
Well, I'm going to say that there's a question of that you're asking in terms of like what is true, right? And what do I believe is true? And then there's the other question, which I think is probably where we should start, which is what did Guy Debord, who wrote The Society of Spectacle, and formulated the theory behind the term, believe? And Debord believed that not only was the spectacle a tool of the capitalist class, not only was it the aim of the capitalist class to create the sense of spectacle, but in fact, the spectacle was the organizing force of society and its essence. So he wrote that when modern industrial production prevails, society presents itself as a mass accumulation of spectacles, as opposed to what Marx wrote, which was as a mass accumulation of commodities. He was writing after World War II. He was writing after the rise of the welfare state and of state capitalism across the globe in many different forms. The by and large, the consensus amongst socialists at that time, amongst Marxists at the time, was that as the state integrated itself with capital, with industry, the difficulties that were seen to be endemic to the capitalist mode of production in the 19th century had been overcome. And so things like competition between private capitalists were no longer definitive, and the production of capital, the reproduction of that form of life, could be sustained indefinitely, and that what was holding back working class revolt, insurrection, was primarily ideological or psychological at times, they would say. So for Debord, the rise of the spectacle indicated a major transformation in the character of society, and it was a change to the very essence of modernity or capitalist society. And from his point of view, I believe that was a mistake. That by the 70s and the rise of neoliberalism, we could see socialists should have been able to recognize that the fundamental character of capitalism hadn't really changed from what it was like in the 19th century.
But does that fundamental change include so in other words, what you're saying is that is the spectacle a tool of disciplining the masses, or is the spectacle an actual part of the means of production in its of itself and part of the profit motive? Or is it a tool of discipline to maintain atomization of the masses so they don't revolt?
Well, it's definitely okay. That it definitely, the spectacle is what held back the masses, kept them within a zeitgeist, kept altered their fundamental psyches so that they would be passive spectators of a world which was alienated from them. That's what the spectacle aimed to do. That's what it was that form of alienation, according to Debord. Then the what was the first two parts again of your question? Because you were asking kind of, is the spectacle a new form of production, right? A new material.
Yes, is it actually like a part of the means of production in and of itself?
Yeah, I believe that Debord believed that it was. That it he in the book Society of Spectacle, he kind of fluctuates a bit. He'll talk about how the decisions that appear in the spectacle and in the market have already been made in the realm of production, but he doesn't explore Marx's critique of political economy or come up with his own theory of production in the book. He doesn't stipulate like how these images or the mass media actually facilitates a kind of production and sets up exchange or distribution. So he kind of has it both ways. The capitalism, as Marx understood it, is still operative, but because of the integration with the state, the spectacle is more significant than capitalist production. Because I think from Debord's point of view, without private capitalists competing, the contradictions within capitalism, and especially the crises that would take the form of economic crises, wouldn't arise. So he didn't see that, he didn't hold with the immiseration thesis, say that eventually the working classes would be so immiserated but they would have no choice but to revolt. He didn't see that as in the future, and I don't really hold with that thesis either. But to kind of keep it simple, he believed that capitalism, in a sense, had been overcome through the state, and that could be the Bolshevik state, because that's the other thing you got to remember about Debord, was he was an anti-Bolshevik. That could have been he equated the Soviet Union with FDR's America. It was not. He did not see Bolshevism or the Soviet system as socialist or as an alternative to the spectacle. There were different kinds of spectacle in the world. There was the diffuse and the concentrated. The diffuse spectacle was in the United States. That was where it seemed to be broken up. There were lots of different centers. It wasn't revolving around one central character. And then there was a concentrated spectacle in Stalinist Russia, where the images and the ideologies were being produced from a central location, in a concentrated form around a personality, and that was the bullshit. That was how he would characterize the Soviet Union.
Did you want to add something, MT? I was going to see if MT wanted to add something.
I'm vibing, man. Sorry. I'm so used to hearing Doug's voice just explain things that I'm just vibing.
Yeah. Well, this is something I feel somewhat confident trying to explain. I would say that the one question that is fascinating to me personally is, why did this anti-Bolshevik Marxist, Guy Debord, become so significant for me personally in the 90s, and I think in the counterculture in the 80s and 90s? Like, what was it about the Situationists International and Guy Debord's theory of the spectacle that was attractive, that people wanted to pick up?
Do you think it's the fact that we're all around the same age? Do you think it's that time of the 80s and 90s being so kind of anti-political and the one thing that you see that becomes quote unquote counterculture might be the counter to consumerism. Did that get you into Debord?
Yeah, for sure. I think that the way in which the culture in the 80s and 90s was appeared to be like monolithic, hegemonic, concentrated within like a few major networks and a few major newspapers, was seen as oppressive. And if you were wanting to think for yourself and be independent, the idea that you were living in a spectacle that you needed to get beyond would be appealing. And it kept everything on the level of ideology. And it also coincided with a moment where, looking back, we can see that that idea of a central monolithic mainstream culture was already suspect. It was already kind of dissolving, because the internet was coming. Cable television had produced 100 channels instead of just the three.
That was going to democratize information, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you bring this up, because I want to ask, basically everyone on the screen, including MT, that moment, which was supposed to be this moment where, much like we hear about things like crypto now, this is going to disrupt the banking system. Cable news. I had a conversation with Adolph Reed, and he said he was in an early meeting where a bunch of these cable providers were meeting with like leftists in the 70s to try to get them on how cable news was going to be this disruptor and democratize the way we get information. And like you said, that didn't happen, because ultimately a handful of channels ended up owning everything. Viacom owned everything under different names. And even in this age of the internet and inexpensive production tools, and when I say production tools, I mean the ability to make a film. You figure in the 70s, even in the 80s, an independent film might cost you $100,000, and that's kind of unheard of even back then. And now you can buy yourself a nice camera, even a drone, lights. So an independent film can be something that costs a few $1,000s, a lot easier to make. The internet allows you to release things whenever you want to, but ultimately the eyes are still controlled by a small handful of companies. Do you guys feel anything's really changed, or is it just the way do we believe things have changed, or is this not much different than the way they were before? Like you said, a handful of companies controlling television, cable news comes in, gives you 100 stations, but it's still the same 3 companies. Here we have the internet. Everything is wide open, but us doing a show out here can be a fart in the wind compared to what eyeballs major corporations get. So has anything really changed?
I think things have changed, but in a cyclical way. I mean, one thing that you are talking about now is that you're talking about how cheap media production has become, right? And in the 90s, there was a zine revolution, right? So anybody could become a publisher. You just go down to Kinko's, and maybe you skate out of there with more copies than you pay for, and you distribute your little underground zine, and it can have pretty high production values, because we have desktop publishing software that anybody can use, and it revolutionized publishing and decentralized publishing. But the zine revolution didn't lead to even 100 major mainstream or general interest magazines being produced in competition with each other. It created a boutique industry of small zines, and a lot of people making things that they just gave away for free, and from that, a few people rose up and created careers for themselves within publishing, but not. I guess I would be one of them in a way. Now, it took me a long time, because I had a zine in the 90s called Diet Soap, and it became a podcast and so forth. But I think I'm not really thinking of that small scale success. But the point is that the competition still existed, and monopolization continued in publishing, and it continues now on the internet, it just in a completely different form. But to go back to the Situationists and the spectacle, the idea was that if you could create situations and deturn the mainstream of the culture, in other words, take spectacular images, spectacular messages, spectacular art forms, and transform them into revolutionary art forms and images and publications, by not just writing something new that would be revolutionary, but transforming what was being produced by the spectacle. You could create a situation where there would be from below a rising up, and and ultimately he was a council communist, so the development of workers' councils, self-directed activity and production, and certainly self-directed media production. And but the last thing, if you were a situationist in France in, let's say, the 50s and 60s, which is when they arose, that you could stomach would be the successful achievement of a mainstream artist's career. The careerists were thrown out of the Situationist International again and again, until finally there was only Guy Debord left. But anyhow,
Pascal.
For me, I think that we definitely in a different time, in that the degree of atomization or the degree of alienation caused by digital technology, the internet, social media, is a little bit different than it was in the 80s or 90s. I think that there was still a little bit more of a sense of the potential for interaction and community in at least the 80s up until the early 90s. But I think that what happens, particularly with social media and the cell phone, more so than anything else, is that it drives a certain alienation, in that everyone is stuck in their own individual reality, and it makes the capacity of community even more difficult to achieve.
Yeah, go ahead. So I have a response to that. Can I?
Yeah, please, please.
I've just been reading the Grindries. I'm going to be teaching a workshop to my patrons. I'm not teaching, it is really the wrong word. I'm going to be participating in a study group, really around the Grindries. But one of the defining characteristics of capitalism itself in the Grindries is the way that it destroys community, traditional community, connections between people, as individuals, as particular people, and the way that it strips away your individuality, your particularity, and instead turns you into a greedy little abstract individual seeking money. That is the consequence of the creation of capitalist relations. And in the Grindries, what's really interesting is that it is Marx sees that as having a dual character. On the one hand, it is a loss. It's a loss of connection. It's a loss of true sociality. But on the other hand, it is a liberation. It is a way to become free of traditional forms of life, free to be truly industrious, free to be independent in and of yourself, as opposed to being enmeshed in some particular role in a small provincial community. So, but it's not just like the media. For Marx, it's the money form that produces these alienated, greedy individuals.
Fascinating. So even the means, the actual means of monetary exchange, helps facilitate the alienation in and of itself.
Yeah, under capitalism, like monetary exchange predates capitalism, but a society which is aimed at circulation through exchange for the basic subsistence is it's one of the things that defines capitalism. And when that emerges, when you have to seek money to meet your most basic needs, And money is the ultimate expression of wealth, much more than any particular kind of wealth. Like you might have warehouses full of carrots and be wealthy in carrots, but it'd be much better to be wealthy in money, because then you can have anything, right? So when that becomes the case, then you have a stripping away of traditional identities, wealth as defined in a particular way, like you be wealthy based on your trade or your community. But instead you become kind of this abstract, greedy little individual who wants to produce just for the sake of getting gold or silver in order to have the power to get whatever you need from the general totality of capital production.
I wanted to ask you a question as well, because I know that you're a big fan of popular culture, film, and the culture industry overall. But one of the main questions I wanted to inquire of you is that what is the role of the culture industry in creating the spectacle? And could we even have the spectacle truly without the role of the culture industry in creating that? Is it a necessary element in creating spectacle within a capitalist society?
Absolutely, it is, and I think while Guy Debord wanted to be perceived as completely his own man, independent, thinking in new ways, the correlation between his theory of the spectacle and and Adorno's talk about the culture industry is pretty pronounced. And I think in some ways Debord takes the culture industry premise further, essentially saying that the production of culture had replaced the production of commodities in modern spectacular society. But there's a lot of correlation between the ideas of the Frankfurt School and Debord's ideas, and it's absolutely the case that without the industrialization and professionalization and centralization of the media and the production of culture as a form of capitalist production, you would not have the spectacle that is the spectacle would have no basis in reality without the culture industry.
How does the spectacle affect us politically?
It makes us passive consumers of a world outside of ourselves, where we think that what's going to happen in the future is basically already happened, and you don't where you don't have any sense of political agency or historical agency as an individual, but merely relate to the world as something to watch and perhaps to consume. That's what Debord would say. He starts. I started rereading Debord and started at the back of the book and read it and then started reading the chapters in reverse order. But by the end of the book, he's describing not what the spectacle does to us politically. That's in the middle. He says, he's describing what it does to us psychologically or as people. What does it do to our nature? And he describes a kind of spectacular subject, a passive consumer, as near catatonic. The difference between the perfect citizen in a spectacular world and a completely dysfunctional mental patient in a ward is minimal at the end of societal spectacle. And yet there's still this sense that can't be maintained, and that the desire for human freedom will overturn the conditions even within our own psyche.
But isn't that kind of what the spectacle allows us to have? A certain personal freedom, if you will, that disconnects us from the whole. So I can see, you live in Portland, where I was just there, and the downtown area looks drastically different than it looked.
When were you in Portland, Jason? And why didn't you call me up?
Kuba's wedding.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, right. So you were just in Portland for a minute.
Yeah, that's
as I-
you. That's to you. Yeah.
Okay.
That's I was in
That
Portland.
was
with
okay.
you.
Never mind.
Yeah,
Take that all
yeah.
back. Rewind.
You get two of those. That's why I was in Portland. God damn it. I wouldn't
but
have
we
been
saw
there
each
no
other
other
in
reason.
Canada. Anyway,
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah. Walking around Portland, Pascal, is like a scene from Get Out.
Oh wow.
But there's human suffering everywhere, and we have the freedom to kind of not really be affected by it personally.
Well, right. Yeah. Did I cut out?
I hear you. Sorry.
Okay. Right. Well, that's right. Alienation from one another, the lack of empathy is certainly an aspect of what it means to be a citizen within a spectacular society, and the trading of our real need to be free to shape our own destiny, which means collectively as well as individually work to change what the future will be. The trading that away for vacation packages and record albums and identification with movie stars and all of that is what the Debord is critiquing. But it's worth noting that his critique keeps going. I mean, that's not the end of the road for what the spectacle does to us. It does do tremendous damage to us. I mean, and I think that maybe some of like I'm very critical of the economic political foundation of Debord's thought, but as a description of what it's like to live in a very media oriented society, it does resonate. That's the other reason why it was so popular in the 80s and 90s, is because along with 100 channels on cable that came 8 hours a day sitting in front of the TV. But yeah, I feel like the Society of Spectacle is a description of the kind of feeling of being, especially maybe a younger person in this society. It has a lot of resonance. And
do you think it lines up with Durkheim's enemy thesis?
Yeah. I mean, but you know what? To tell me, remind me, because I've read about that, but it's been years. How does enemy means alienation from society and a feeling of powerlessness in society, right?
Yeah, and so kind of like bad actions become normalized, right?
Right. Yeah.
Rulelessness, normalness. Pascal,
yeah.
you know a little bit about that?
No, I'm not as much as an expert on Durkheim as you are, brother.
Whoa, slow down. First of all,
everyone, take a screenshot of this moment.
The thing is intriguing to me is like it's more so as societies decline, and I think for me personally, what the spectacle adds, and this is kind of what I'm working on with the kayfabe piece. As societies decline, the spectacle becomes oh so important. And we are extremely atomized and disconnected. And even when we look at protest, for me, a lot of protest is just spectacle. And that's the way it's been sold to the masses, especially young people. It's just shutting down a freeway, throwing a can of soup, burning down a police station. These systems aren't affected by, this is going to sound bad, by your tantrum.
Ouch.
Eyeballs get on it, people get involved, but there's a huge release after you've smashed the window and shouted and marched. And it's not all protests, right? There actually are some movements that are actually starting, actually make some substantive change. But if we think about 2020, which is something we talk about here on the show quite a bit, what happened after all of that destruction? I'm asking the question. I'm not.
Joe Biden got elected.
You said Joe Biden.
Yeah.
I remember of course I do. Everyone remembers the summer of the George Floyd protests, and
Portland is still devastated from it.
Yeah, and I recall the photo ops that Biden took, walking amongst the people with the Black Lives Matter banners in the background, shaking people's hands, and I thought at the time, I said, if no alternative political vision emerges from these protests, this will be nothing more than part of the Biden campaign. And that is what happened. Nothing emerged from it. I mean, not for lack of trying. There were lots of young people, especially, who spent hours and hours in meetings, organizing protests, reading, trying to think up 100 different things that they could do to create a political movement out of that moment. But they had, I think, people like me and boomers had not left them anything much to work with, and they had to try to invent it all again. And they usually were around the universities, the people who were doing this, and so they were picking up, sort of in this piecemeal fashion, some of the worst ideas of the new left as that happened. So like, maybe we could get some communal land and we could all move off into the forest. Or that's what, in Oregon, people were saying.
Yeah. I mean, we had the Chad, what was it called in Seattle?
Chaz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were these kind of temporary spaces. It did feel very 60s-esque. It did feel very, let's get some land that Universal's selling off because they're hemorrhaging money.
Felt very 90s to me. I remember the book about temporary autonomous zones coming out maybe in the late 80s or early 90s, where that was a big, there was a brief return to anarchism. People thought about the coming insurrection again, which was a book from 2007. And it wasn't just anarchism in America seems particularly white, but it wasn't just white people who were turned into this anarchist moment. It was all sorts of people, because that's what was on hand, especially in opposition to the social democratic electoral project, which had just failed, which had just fallen apart. So.
I mean, we only have Doug for a few more minutes. I mean, Pascal and MT, how do you feel about that?
I think that Doug said something that was very, very important, that all of this quote unquote radical insurrectional energy got channeled into electing Joe Biden. And not only that it got channeled into it, the imagery was appropriated by the Democratic Party. They used it at the convention, and they used it to elect, a left flank of Capitol president. What does that say about the capacity and potentiality of insurrection in American society? Is that a consequence of the bourgeoisification of radical posturing, foundation influence? The fact that some of these movements were headed by people that were within the overall coterie of some of these foundations? How does this happen? That the liberal capitalist party is able to appropriate all of this supposedly radical energy for election purposes? I think it's a pretty strong condemnation of those who found those particular moments to be so revolutionary.
I want to say I gotta go, but I want to say one thing, which is that the way that the Society of Spectacle and Guy Debord were taken up in the 90s in particular was through anarchism, through American anarchism. It was not Marxist groups that were reading Society of Spectacle. It
Agreed.
was primitivist anarchists, lifestyle anarchists, maybe some anarcho-syndicalists. And when people return to Debord today, what I tried to do as I returned to him today was think of him as a Marxist first, and in his historical moment, in relation to other Marxist movements, and in relation to the historical struggles that had gone on, including what had happened in Hungary, and Germany, and Poland, right in the 50s, right around the time that the anti-Bolshevik turn rose up. That you have to not take Debord up on the level of a vibe, but and through the understanding his critique in history, and seeing it as a continuation of the struggle for socialism through a Marxist tradition, because that's really what it was. And then you can critique Debord, hopefully more productively than the way in which we celebrated him in the 90s worked out.
Well, thank you very much, Doug. I know you're busy teaching a class about something.
I'm joining us, the Grindries, the study group, which we're going to run on Zoom in about 7 minutes. So I should go.
Doug, I'll let you go. Thank you very much. Doug Lain, CEO of Sublation Media. Thank you for hanging out with us. This is a conversation that we definitely can have for much longer. MT, I'm sure you have something you'd like to add.
Well, I was wondering if anyone saw anything positive in the spectacle. There are activist groups that are trying to have a spectacle, to have a moment, to get some attention. And it's not just throwing soup on the painting. It's not just PETA throwing red paint on people and fur. It's other groups trying to get some attention. So I just wondered if there was anything you all saw that was good about spectacle.
I don't think those people are sitting around trying to make a huge spectacle. I think when you're really doing work, you're so busy really doing work. You don't really have time for that level of press.
And you have to raise awareness, Jason.
MT has a very strong point, because there is an element of spectacle to protest. There is an element of spectacle to demonstrative oppositional politics, because as MT said quite eloquently, consciousness raising has to occur. And how does consciousness raising occur without a visual stimulant to entice those who have not had their consciousness raised to say, oh, this is what's happening?
I mean, there's a great interview with Huey Newton towards the end that he does for a series that every Black person my age has watched, called Eyes on the Prize. And you can see his whole interview. I believe a lot of it was deleted, if any was even shown in I don't really remember, because they had a couple Eyes on the Prizes. And I took part of his whole interview for the Huey Newton video essay that we have. And in it, he says, he's like, we were over the leather jackets and the berets relatively quickly. There were other things that we were doing politically. And it gets overshadowed. I think people know a little bit about the clinics. I think people know about the free breakfast programs, but I don't really hear people talk about, Bobby Seale getting involved in local politics. Not too many people talk about them trying to have real political power in the city of Oakland. And, I don't know how many other cities they were actually running candidates. So I do think that the spectacle obfuscates the actual vision. Judas and the Black Messiah kind of gives us the same Messiah narrative that we really don't need in 2022 and moving forward into 2023. And these things get stuck in that narrative, that there were these messiahs that came along and they disrupted the system. I don't know how much the system was truly disrupted.
Mm.
There's a quote that Pascal Robert said when he first came on this show, and that is Black Power succeeded culturally where it failed politically. And I've watched more than enough documentaries on the blaxploitation era, making the most recent video essay on blaxploitation films. And there is one line that is echoed through the majority of people, especially ones that were involved in these movements, and that was, "We won the culture war."
Mm.
Mm.
That was a point of pride.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of pride.
This project succeeded culturally. I believe Tupac's mom, Afeni Shakur.
Mhm.
I don't remember the name of the documentary, and I don't remember if it was a BBC one or not. Again, I watched a lot. She literally says that. She goes, "We didn't win politically, but we won culturally."
Pyrrhic victory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You
Wow.
wanna add
That was a
anything?
downer.
Well, it's why it's when you talk about consciousness raising, when you think about the political moment that we're in, where both parties are admitting that there's a failure of institutions, and instead of discussions about how to make said institutions better, or maybe even a new economic system, or even just a little bit of social democracy, we just always devolve into name calling, and it looks like pro wrestling. That's all it looks like to me. The political moment that we're in, including the podcast sphere, it just looks like pro wrestling. How do you get beyond that spectacle? Because there's advantages to that level of engagement, right?
Mhm.
How do you break through that? And that's, I don't know, that's,
Is it the change that breaks through that? An actual disruption? Those are
and
still subsumed, but if you can get an actual one.
I don't know what that looks like. I mean, that movie that you talked about, Don't Look Up, really is a mirror for America. And people looked in it and just checked their hair and kept moving.
That's very true.
And it's not like people slept on it. It got nominated for an Oscar, I believe, right? Didn't
Yes.
Did very well.
Yes, it did.
so it's what, sorry, I don't have a cheery note to end on. Maybe Pascal can end us on a cheery note.
No, come on, man. Really?
I have a cheery note.
All right.
There may be only a handful of companies producing your media, your movies, your cable channels, but you still have 31 flavors at Baskin Robbins. And there are still 36 chambers. Okay? We still have that.
You know, but let's get serious for a moment. We've actually had some people on this show that are actually doing real work, right?
Yes.
And if we end on a doom and gloom note, we had Tanya on this show, who's actually giving food to people in urban areas with urban gardens. Dylan was on the show talking about the protests for the student faculty, the teachers, and the UC system, which is one of the biggest protests we have going on in this country. We've covered the railway strikes. We had the Teamster union rep and Paul Prescott on to talk about that. There seems to be a moment where labor is starting to rise up. So it's not all doom and gloom, right?
I agree with that.
Chris Moss is the illest.
Chris Small.
Not to create a messiah, but
it's I don't know, maybe it's not all doom and gloom.
it can't be. It never is.
Never is.
I think that the contradictions present opportunities.
See, I told you can end on a look. There you go. No, it's happy, just like that.
Pascal's all rainbows.
There you
All
go.
rainbows, this guy.
If you guys want to see some rainbows in real life, bam! January 22nd in New York, New York! Give Them a Revolution live show. Me, Ben Burgess, Matt Leck, David Griscom, the TIR crew, a host of others. We're going to start planning out this live show sooner than later, as one of my live show co-hosts will be joining me for brunch that I'm making. So on that note, are you ready to bounce out of here, MT?
Yeah, let's bounce. Booty
Thank
back
you
to the
very
booty
much.
barn.
Thank you very much, Doug Lain, Pascal Robert. Anything you guys have to say? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments on this show. I'm sure people are going to be very opinionated about this. Leave them in the comments. Pascal's going to respond to everyone.